Hi everybody and welcome back to 2BeLikeChrist. And in today's video, I feel especially prepared because I just ate an entire tub of macaroni and cheese. One important key to Bible study is eat mac and cheese and you will exegete correctly. All right, now getting into our text, our lesson today is going to be on Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to finish out the rest of the chapter that we haven't done. So we're going to do 13 through the end of the chapter. But before we do that, I found one important point in the verses that we covered last that I'd like to point out. I've been studying a lot of apologetics lately, and I've found that a lot of skeptics will attack the fact that Jesus and the gospel writers taught that they were God. That Jesus did not believe himself to be God and did not teach himself to be God, and that the gospel writers did not intend to portray that message, that was something that developed later on in history. I absolutely reject that, and for many reasons, but I found a reason in this text as well. Remember, we talked about the star, and how did the wise men know about the star? If it is in fact special revelation that revealed the star to the wise men, then whatever that special revelation was, it instructed them to, let me find it on our page here. For we saw his star, verse 2, rose, we have come to worship him. So if God gives these individuals special revelation, and whatever that special revelation was, it instructed them that this being was great enough to be worshipped, and if it was from God, the only being that would be great enough to be worshipped was himself incarnate. And so, yes, the gospel writers absolutely believed and taught that Jesus was divine. Moving on to verse 13. Let's read this text. One way that I find to be extremely helpful when studying the Bible is actually to pull out all the names of the characters that are in a text and then use my imagination. And yes, you have to have an imagination to study the Bible. Use my imagination and put myself in their shoes and try to take in the environment, take in what they're hearing, take in the implications of God's commands to them or the consequences for their actions, and try to just absorb all of that and see what I can get out of it. So I want to do that with three people today in this study. The first one is with Mary. The second one is with the women who lost their children when Herod killed them. And then the third one is Joseph himself. Mary and Joseph will kind of be together. The first lesson that I would like to observe from this text is in regards to the implications of what God was asking Joseph to do, and his and Mary's tremendous faith in doing it. We talked about this a little bit already, that Joseph had great faith because of the responsibility he took on in raising Jesus, even though there was probably a lot of ire and a lot of shame that people were trying to push onto him, because it appeared that child was his and he wasn't in a relationship where he should be having a child. So he took that on in great faith. But then so many times it seems that once we conquer one mountain that God's put in front of us, we get to the top of that mountain only to find that there's another mountain right in the way. And then we climb that one, and sometimes there's a third mountain right in the way. And for Joseph, I feel like this is probably how he felt, because he's just done this great responsibility that God has given to him, and now God throws something entirely different at him, and that is an angel of the Lord comes to him in verse 13, and he says, "Get up, go to Egypt, take your child, and leave." Put yourself there in Joseph's bed as he hears this at night, and the text says that he got up during the night and left, seemingly that same night. What would have been running through Joseph's mind in that situation? Well, think about it. Joseph, like you and I, we know he had a job. And he had a job as a carpenter, making some money, providing for his family, and that job was probably somewhat secure, and he had probably built some relationships in that town, and he had a network of people, and maybe he even had work that he was doing that very moment for somebody. And God was asking him to essentially throw all that away, to give it all up, to go in this radical step of obedience to follow him. And for all of us, that would be an extraordinarily difficult situation to be put in And when we put ourselves into that situation, we realize how difficult that situation really is, because what if God asked us to do that? I know that you have a job. I know that you've been working on this career for some time now, many years, and I know that you've put a lot of time and a lot of effort into it, and you do a good job at your work, and your family's secure, and you have a nice house, and you're comfortable, and God says, throw it away and do what I tell you, and follow me. And what's astounding is that just like the first time God asked Joseph to do something, Joseph's answer was, yes, Lord. He got up, he went and did it. Incredible faith. Incredible faith. Especially when we ask ourselves, would I be willing to do that? Knowing the importance that I put on those things that he was asking him to give up? And then I want to notice as we go down through the rest of the text, he says, go down to Egypt. Joseph doesn't know the culture of Egypt, probably doesn't know if he's going to know the language of Egypt. He doesn't know the environment. He doesn't know if it's safe in Egypt. He probably doesn't know anything about Egypt. And God says, go. And so he goes. And as we look down in verse 19, Joseph probably spends a couple years in Egypt. He probably has a chance to build himself up. He's probably a carpenter down there, probably gets some connections. He works on building a life in Egypt and becoming comfortable in Egypt. And then the angel of the Lord appears to him again and says, all right, Joseph, get up, get out of Egypt, and go back to Judah. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I would have the tendency to say, no, Lord. I've worked hard to try to provide for my family, and that's a good thing. I'm not going to leave Egypt. You just drug me down here, and I had to give up everything that I had, and now you're asking me to give it all up again? Why should I do that? And sometimes God does put several mountains in our way, and again, we are astounded by Joseph's response, because he doesn't say that. And he doesn't argue with God. And we know that there was fear associated with him going back to Judah because he couldn't go back to Bethlehem because Archelaus was reigning in his father's place and he was afraid of him. And so even through his fear, even through his uncertainty, he moves to a new town in Galilee. He moves to Nazareth. Not a question, not an argument, nothing from Joseph except, yes, Lord, I will do it. Astounding faith. Astounding faith. And even though this is all we know about Joseph, I think Matthew really lifts him up to a position that deserves to be respected, even though so many times we just completely forget about him because we read through this text so fast. All right, I need to hurry up because my time is I'm running long. The second person I want you to put your shoes in is these women, these mothers who lost their children. Herod comes along and he's like, give me your child, I'm taking it, and I'm killing it. Anyone in that situation might have the tendency to say, as many people who suffer do, where is God? Where is God in this? He must be asleep. He must not be paying attention. He must not care. He must not have any time to spend with us puny humans down here on the earth. And atheists today are really advancing a teaching that says, look at all this evil in the world. God cannot exist because we look around and we see terrible things and we don't see God anywhere. This passage, I think, blows that argument up because, yes, in a small human perspective, these mothers may have been asking, where on earth is God when I needed him? And as we look back at the broad picture, and in hindsight, we see that God is all over this situation. God is absolutely on the move to bring about the good for these women and for the good of the entire world. And in fact, it's God in this text that is setting up the death of his own son to redeem all men forever. The accusation that God is not listening or that he is asleep or that he doesn't care is totally ungrounded. And we see that when we step back and look from a big picture. And so I would encourage you, if people present that to you today, to step back and to look at a big picture and to say, maybe God really is working, and maybe I just need to open my mind to that idea. All right. Oh, the third lesson. The third lesson is regarding the age of Mary and Joseph. We're going to go back to Mary and Joseph. I think this is extraordinarily important, because I think for a lot of young people, they feel that they are in the church and there's not a whole lot that they can do, because sometimes they feel like they're looked down on, and sometimes they genuinely are looked down on as not being able to really step into a position of any kind of responsibility in the church, and older people sometimes are hesitant to give them any responsibility. I was blessed to grow up in a congregation where I really was blessed to have an opportunity to step into responsibility early, but there are many congregations where that's not the case. I think there's an observation here. We have such a tendency to look at the Bible characters, at least I do, and to see them as like older people. That no matter how old I get, the Bible characters are always older than me. And here we see a scene with a father and with a mother and with a child, and we think, oh, they're probably 30, 35, something like this, and they're given this really hard task by God. Their faith is more mature, than mine is, because they're older than me. And if you look back at well, even if you look at our culture, the average marriage age might be 25. And if I look at that, I'm actually 26 now. So that makes, if we want to impose that back on biblical history, that makes me older than Mary and Joseph. And I look at what God asked them to do, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of responsibility for somebody so young. But the truth is that back in biblical times, people were marrying much younger than they are today, especially the women. So Mary almost certainly was in her teenage years when this was happening. Joseph maybe in his early 20s. So how many of you guys are that age? Probably a lot of you. And don't think of these people as old older people who have stronger faith and they've had all this time to develop. They're not. God gives this responsibility to an incredibly young couple, because he believed that they could bear the burden that he was going to give them. And as we've just seen from the faith of Joseph and Mary, they absolutely came through on that responsibility. And so, when you look at the Bible, the characters of the Bible, don't assume they're older than you. Joseph, teenager. Joseph, in the Old Testament, who became second in command of Egypt, saved all those people, teenager, when he was sold and sent to Potiphar's house. David, killing Goliath, teenager. Daniel, in front of the king of Babylon, teenager. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, probably teenagers. Jeremiah, teenager, when he started his work for the Lord. Mary and Joseph now, teenagers. Although it may happen in the church, God has never discredited the faith of youth. Never. Some of the youngest people have been given the most responsibility to glorify God on the earth. That's just straight out of the Bible. So do not think that because you are young, you cannot work, you cannot be responsible, you cannot do great things through the power of God for the furtherance of the church and for the glory of God. Don't think that. And so, 3 observations here from this text, if you just put yourself in the situation of those characters, and I encourage you to do that with every text. This study is definitely long. I'm looking at my time, and I'm way over, but thanks for sticking with me, and we'll be back soon.